Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace and blessings of God be upon you all. I believe there are some parents who are unable to understand Tamil, therefore I have to speak in English. There is a beautiful verse in the Quran which says, الَّذِينَ يَسْتَمِعُونَ الْقَوْلَ فَيَتَّبِعُونَ أَحْسَنَهُ أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ هَدَاهُمُ اللَّهُ وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمْ أُولُو الْأَلْبَابِ. Those who listen to speech and follow the best of it, those are the ones Allah has guided, and those are the people of understanding. This ayah talks about the importance of intellectual discourse, because it says the people who listen to the speeches and then choose the best of them. So this is a very good quality that people should have. Listen to the speech, contemplate over what has been said, evaluate what has been said, and then choose what is the best of it. That is how nations progress. You choose the best ideas and then you adopt them, and then you become a better nation. So with that opening ayah, I'm very pleased to be sharing with you some of my Ramadan thoughts. Talking about the month of Ramadan, Allah says in the Quran, شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان. Allah defines the month of Quran, defines Ramadan. He says Ramadan is the month in which Quran was revealed. So the Ramadan is defined as the month in which Quran was revealed. And then he goes on to explain what Quran is about. Allah says it is a guidance for mankind. It doesn't say it is a guidance for the Muslims. It says a guidance for the mankind, Hudal Linnas. And it says it is the most authoritative of all guidance. And it is the criterion. It is the Furqan, meaning Quran is what distinguishes between what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is bad. So the thing that we take from this Quranic ayah is that this month is defined as the month of Quran, and then Quran is Huda, it is guidance for all mankind. Now, we Muslims are people who have the Quran, therefore we have the guidance with us. But then how are we perceived by the rest of the world? Are we perceived as people who solve problems, or are we perceived as people who create all kinds of troubles in the world? As you know, the general perception about the Muslims in the world is that we are very backward, we are very emotional, we are not irrational, we are sort of terrorists. This is the perception that the rest of the world has about us. But at the same time, we are a people of Quran, we are a people of guidance. Now, there is a huge difference between what we think of ourselves and what the rest of the world thinks of us. There is a huge gap. How do we narrow this gap? It is important that we do narrow this gap. If we don't, then we will continue to suffer. Because if people perceive us as problematic, then we won't be allowed to have a peaceful life. Therefore, if there is any wrong perceptions, any misconceptions about Islam and Muslims, that has to be rectified. That is our duty, because we believe that we have the Quran and we have the guidance, we can actually solve all the problems in the world. Then we should be able to dispel all the misconceptions and the myths that they have about Islam. Therefore, there is a need for us to talk to everybody, especially across the religious divide. We need to talk to people who are from other religious persuasions. That is why I recited that particular ayah at the beginning of this little speech. I said the successful people are those who listen to speeches, they contemplate over what has been said, and then they choose what is the best of it. So with that spirit, let's have a look at some of the things that I'm going to say now. Now, more than ever before, the need for us to talk with non-Muslims, the need today is far greater than it has ever been, because we are living in a time when there are lots of problems. There is a lot of Islamophobia, not just in Sri Lanka, but globally. Muslims are at the receiving end of a lot of violence. So this is the time when we have to talk, we have to clarify things. Because human beings, they are unlike animals. Animals cannot sit down and talk. They fight or they just take flight if they can't solve the problem. But human beings, God has given us this rational faculty so we can think, and He has also given us this ability to speak so we can articulate what we have thought through. So this discussion, this intellectual discourse is very important. And it should take place, as I said before, between the Muslims and the non-Muslims. Now, you cannot engage in an intellectual discourse if you do not have a deep understanding of Islam. Because obviously, unless you understand what Islam is about, you cannot communicate to the non-Muslims. So we as Muslims need to first understand what Islam is about. So that is number one. Understanding Islam is insufficient. We also need to understand the context that we live in. The time that we live in, the post 9/11 period that they call, is unlike any other period, in the last couple of centuries. This is a time when Islam is under attack from everywhere, basically. You can see this everywhere, all over the world. So you need to understand the context as well. Now, the context, to put it in one sentence, is what we call the global war on terror. They call it the war on Islam. They call it war on terror. But actually it is war on Islam. So this war on Islam is taking place between the Muslim world and largely the Western world. So that is where the confrontation or the conflict is taking place. Now, for people in Sri Lanka, they are not partners in this conflict. They are just observers. So they have to take a certain view with regards to this conflict that is taking place between the Muslims and the non-Muslims. Inevitably, they have to take sides. This is what George Bush said when he declared the war on terror. He said, there are no passive observers. When we have this war on terror, you are either with us or with the enemy. So nations are not given the chance to be neutral observers. So that is true in the case of Sri Lanka as well. So now the question before us is, which side do we want the Sri Lankan state to take? Do we want them to take the side of the Western world which is attacking Islam, or do we want them to empathize with the Muslims and see the justice on our side? Obviously it is the latter. Now, if you want that to happen, you have to talk to them. So that is my point. Now, you cannot talk to them unless you understand what Islam is about and also the political context that we live in now. Sadly today, we say and we believe that we have the solutions, but we need to first understand the problems, because solutions are there to deal with the problems. So what are the problems that the Sri Lankan community is faced with? There are major problems in our country. Now, as people of Sri Lanka, as citizens of Sri Lanka, we have a responsibility. We have to make some contributions towards the betterment of the country. Now, what better contribution can we make than proposing solutions to some of the pestering problems? Now, what are the problems that the Sri Lankan community has? It is not a piece of cloth, the niqab that the Muslim women wear. That is not the problem. It is not the color of the hijab. That is not the problem. But unfortunately, the color of the niqab or the niqab itself has become just like something of a national debate. But let me enlist some of the real problems that people are facing in Sri Lanka. Poverty. 6.7% of the Sri Lankans, they live below poverty line. And as a result of that, millions of Sri Lankans are migrating abroad for work. 1.7 million Sri Lankans are abroad working. Now, would you call this a natural life? When people migrate abroad, at least for most of them, is that a natural life? I don't think it is, because they are separated from their family, their children, and also they work for meager wages. Most of them are in Gulf countries. So, as you can see, this is a major problem. Poverty is a big problem. But is this being discussed on a national level? Isn't this something that we should be discussing? Isn't this the problem that we should be proposing solutions to, if you have the solutions? And also you might have heard about microcredit. They identify people who are struck by poverty, who are really, really poor. They go to them, they give them loans, and then they collect the interest. Now, a lot of the interest collectors, when they go to collect their interest, these poor people are unable to pay. So you know what happens in Sri Lanka? A lot of these people, they are forced to sleep with the guy who goes there to collect the interest. Because if you can't pay, you have to sleep with me. So this is something that is happening in Sri Lanka. Some of the coroners who have looked at the suicide associated with this microcredit, they have said, this is one of the reasons. They are unable to pay, and because of that, they are being forced to sleep with them, and this leads to suicide. Now, talking about suicide, approximately 3,263 people committed suicide in Sri Lanka last year. This is according to the police statistics. Now, that's about 9 persons a day. Every 3 hours, between 2.5 hours and 3 hours, someone is committing suicide. So why are these people committing suicide? They must have lost all hope. They must be having a lot of problems that they are unable to solve. So there are problems that we have to look into and that we can propose solutions to. Murder in Sri Lanka, about 452 persons were killed last year. Again, this is according to the police statistics. Robbery, about 3,366 last year. That's about 9 robberies every day. Extortion, 178. So rape, again, 1,732 last year. So you can see there is a long list of problems that Sri Lanka has. These are the problems that they should be on the national discourse, and people should be discussing these problems. And as Muslims, if you are to make any contribution to the betterment of the country, this is what we should do. We should propose solutions. We believe we have the solutions. Forgive me if I'm repeating myself over and over again, because this is an important point that I would like to drive home. We are perceived as troublemakers, irrational people, emotional people, sort of terrorists. But that's not our reality. So this is something for us to deal with. And again, alcoholism. In alcoholism, according to Dr. Palitha Bekon, chairman of National Authority on Tobacco and Alcohol, he says Sri Lankans consume 7 times more than an average European. Can you believe that? So there are a lot of problems associated with alcohol, abuse. Now, annually Sri Lankan government takes about 143 million Sri Lankan rupees as tax from alcohol sales. On the other hand, on alcohol-related health issues, the government is spending about 212 million. So that's about 69 million more than the tax or the income that they are actually getting from the alcohol sales. So these statistics actually comes from NATA, from Dr. Palitha Bekon. So you can see there are tangible evidence before us which proves that there are problems. Now, what is even more shocking when you look at these statistics is that the people of this country, Sri Lanka, whether they are Muslims or Buddhists or Hindus or Christians, they have certain values. They have certain values. Let me identify some of these values which are very common to all the religious groups. You shouldn't harm living things. You shouldn't harm living things. You shouldn't take things that doesn't belong to you without permission from other people. You should abstain from sexual misconduct. You shouldn't lie. You shouldn't take alcohol. So look at these values. But if you look at the statistics, these values are non-existent in the society. These values do not exist in the society. Now, who destroys these values in the society? That is an important question to ask. I would argue that it is the Western values that is destroying all these indigenous religious values. So when these values are destroyed, that is what we end up with. We end up with a society where there is no safety, where there is no wealth, there is a lot of poverty, there is a lot of disease, and there is a lot of crime. So, yeah. So basically, there isn't a lot of time that I have to talk. So this is basically my message. So to summarize, I would call upon you to think about the serious problems that Sri Lankan should be discussing with. The problems that the Sri Lankan should be discussing with is not the hijab, it is not the color of the hijab or things like that. These are distraction. You know, you should be looking at all the problems that are listed now, because this affects everybody. Every Sinhalese, every Muslim, every Hindu, every Christian are affected by this problem. So we need to address these problems, and as Muslims, as people who believe that we have the solution, you know, we have to identify these problems. Not only that, we have to also present solutions. So with that conclusion, I bring my speech to an end. Thank you for listening. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum.